This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Nina Marnie. Good evening. My name is Professor Marnie Hughes-Warrington. It's quite a moving moment. I'm Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research and Enterprise here at the University of South Australia, and it gives me just enormous pleasure to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the Bob Hawke Centre, Prime Ministerial Centre, Samstag Museum of Art, the Office of the Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Aboriginal Leadership and Strategy, and the University of South Australia for tonight's yarn with Djon Mundine and Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta, to be facilitated by Professor Lester-Irabinna Rigney AM. And before I begin, I want to welcome a really esteemed friend of UniSA, a great teacher, probably the most patient teacher on the planet, I think. So I'd like us all to welcome, with respect, Uncle Dr. Lewis O'Brien, who's alumnus of ours, adjunct research fellow, great teacher and a member of UniSA Education Futures. And tonight, Uncle, he's going to welcome us to this beautiful country. Welcome, Uncle.
Marawachanga, Ghana Mian and Iwangani, Mani Nabundi Gani Atana. Naibiriko, Mankalakala, Tandanya, Mianaku. Nature Yungandalia, Nature Yakanandalia, Padni Adlu Waru. On behalf of the Ghana people, I welcome you all to Ghana country, and I do this ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk together in harmony. There was a newly appointed elder up north, and his mob went to him and said, "Elder, what's the coming weather going to be like?" And he thought for a moment and he said, "The coming weather is going to be cold. I want you to go and collect some wood." So off they went to collect some wood. The truth be known, he didn't do the subject on the weather, but being a clever old bloke, he went down to the phone on the highway and he rang the Weather Bureau. And he said, "What's the coming weather going to be like?" And they said, "It's going to be very cold." He said, "Thank you very much." He went back to his mob again and he said, "I want you to go and collect more wood. The coming weather is going to be very cold." And so after a few more days, he went down to the phone on the highway again, rang the Weather Bureau. "What's the coming weather going to be like?" They said, "Very cold." He said, "Thank you very much." And he went back to his mob. He said, "I want you to collect every bit of wood you can find. Coming weather is going to be very cold." So then after a few more days, he went to the phone on the highway again. He rang them and said, "What's the coming weather going to be?" They said, "Very cold." And he said, "What makes you so sure the weather's going to be cold?" He said, "We got satellite pictures up north. Aboriginal collecting wood like crazy. It's a sure sign."
Thank you so much, Uncle. I want to say two things, Uncle. Thank you for always being so generous to welcome us to country. I want to acknowledge that we have not always been welcoming in return, and I think it's on us to welcome in the way that you are so generous. Uncle's welcomes remind us that every welcome is for us personal. And that's the beauty of and the power of Aboriginal knowledge, is that it is written for us in our moment, and it is for us to learn from it. So thank you, Uncle. I'm very grateful. We're all grateful. Got a lot of people to thank tonight for this amazing event. We've got Jacinta Thompson, Executive Director, Events and Exhibitions, producer of the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre, Erica Green, Director, Samstag Museum of Art, Professor Irene Watson, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, Aboriginal Leadership Strategy at UniSA, for all of their work in bringing this remarkable event together, and their teams. I would also like to acknowledge the attendance of our Burkanindi UniSA elders in residence and pay my respects. Uncle Lewis, Kim Kropiniya, and David Rathman, Uncle David Rathman. Djon Mundine and Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta join us here this evening as part of the Pirku UniSA Visiting Research Fellowship. It's a donor co-sponsored program that's part of the University of South Australia's commitment to grow the community of Aboriginal researchers and support Indigenous and First Nation-led research globally. To be very clear, Aboriginal knowledges and wisdom and research exist. It is for us to recognise it and to amplify it and to celebrate it, to recognise the country we are in and to celebrate the talents that are with us. These are globally exceptional talents, and if we understand these, then we will take a truly exceptional view to the world. These fellowships are part of the UniSA Visiting Research Fellowship Scheme, which is a UniSA innovation. It's a first in Australia. And our aim is to bring the world's most talented minds and practitioners to Adelaide to work in partnership with our researchers, businesses and the community. Our goal is to have 500 fellows, 100 per annum. And our celebration is that our first fellows are Aboriginal fellows, and they are a critical part of our program. Now tonight we've got curator, writer, artist and activist Djon Mundine, and he's a proud Bundjalung man from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. He's held many senior curatorial positions in both national and international institutions, some of which include the National Museum of Australia, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Campbelltown Art Centre. In 1993, he received the Medal of the Order of Australia for service to the promotion and development of Aboriginal arts, crafts and culture. He also won the Australia Council's 2020 Red Ochre Award for Lifetime Achievement and is currently an independent curator of contemporary Indigenous art and cultural mentor. Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta belongs to the Appalach clan from Western Cape York and is an Indigenous thinker and author currently living in Melbourne. He's the founder of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University, which applies Indigenous complexity science perspectives and methods to address global crises in governance, economics, climate, cybernetics, education and more. He graduated cum laude with a doctorate in education from James Cook University in 2009 and worked with elders and young people all over Australia until 2017 when he joined the Academy temporarily as a researcher and lecturer. Tonight, our guests will be joined by exceptional local talent as well, Professor Lester-Irabinna Rigney. And I love introducing Irabinna because it always gives me a chance to embarrass him and say, as Deputy Vice-Chancellor, it's my job to know who all our researchers are, but I know this researcher very, very well. Irabinna is a respected educational leader in this country. It is often the case that when education becomes politicised or digs down to ground, Irabinna stands up. He has stood up repeatedly and spoken up. He has spoken up to ensure that the voice of Aboriginal people is part of education, that Aboriginal people are not talked about in education, but they drive and they lead education. He's a descendant of the Noongar and Wurundjeri peoples. In 2021, he was appointed member in the General Division AM for significant service to Indigenous education and to social education research. He's Professor of Education in the Centre for Research in Education and Social Inclusion here at UniSA and an extraordinary member of our community. Irabinna, it's just great to see you here. Thank you, Djon, Tyson. Thank you so much for joining us. I think a round of applause to just recognise. Folks, this is Australia. This is the past, the present and the future of Australia. Welcome. I hand over to you, Irabinna.
Elders who are in the room today, on behalf of my colleagues sitting here, they wanted to let you know, as well as I do, just what an honour it is to be up in here sitting before you. And for the elders in your community, we know that they're a long way away, but we wanted to acknowledge your family members and your community. We know you both are a long way from home and the floods, COVID, and we hope that your family is safe. Uncle Lewis, it's always an honour and a pleasure. Some amazing people that really need to be thanked that got us all in the room tonight. Jacinta, thank you so much for everything. I'm sorry I was late today. I'm a fill-in for Professor Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Irene Watson, and I'm really honoured to be here. So thank you, Jacinta, for all your work. Renee, thanks very much. DVCR, Professor Hughes Warrington. I remember reading one of your first pieces when the war on Aboriginal history was at its height, and to acknowledge your latest publication that suggests that Australia does have an Indigenous history. And I think one of the most important things for me was that you were trying to break the amnesia of the country, and it's just really honour to be here in front of you today. Erica Green, are you in the room? Where are you? Thank you, Erica. You and Jacinta Renee are a terrific team. The Hawke Institute, who is an amazing institution. And if you haven't been to the Hawke Institute, you're really missing out on a treat. So if you get a chance, our colleagues are welcoming you. University of South Australia is such honoured to have such esteemed colleagues in our midst, and the University of South Australia's RAP is really doing a couple of things extremely well. It's doing a lot of things, but it's doing a couple of things very well. One, it wants to honour and elevate Indigenous excellence, and the work that you're about to hear in the next hour is contributing to that story of Indigenous excellence. And I'm really honoured that the University of and the Hawke Centre have asked me to come and facilitate the conversation. So it's my brothers, my scholars, my colleagues. It's really lovely to have you here. We go way back, both of you. Djon, 20 years, I think, and I still owe you that $50. I hope you don't charge interest. I was a young scholar then, Djon.
Tyson, I had to wait and come to Adelaide now.
And Tyson, your earlier work and your latest book at the moment, we're hoping that you'll share with us today, and it's a real tribute to have you here as well. I think the two propositions that we're wanting to talk with today, the first is, whilst the time that you're with us as the visiting research fellow, there are two questions that really sort of really join all of our works. And I guess these two questions are that our work and our life's work constantly has to explain how inequality works in the colonial settler state. And it feels as though our work has to update everybody on how inequality works, because there is this there is no corporate history of how colonial old patterns and old formations turn into new formations of inequality. So I guess the first question is, how does inequality work for you at the moment, and how is your work explaining it? The second question is, how do we overcome it? And I think that that's the expression that both of your long pieces of work have done, including mine, is trying to solve these two questions. So I guess in explaining how your work seeks to speak back to these two propositions, just giving us an insight for 20 minutes, what your work will be doing whilst you're with us and what you hope to achieve. So, my brothers, I am in your hands. Which one would you like to go first?
You don't think of it? Well, look, this was the thing we should have decided in the dressing room. But anyway, it's like who
we can give
them
some Aretha Franklin.
Yes,
that was our sound check.
Singing
we were
Aretha
doing.
Franklin. Yeah.
All right, you're up.
Well, I'll just go off. The problem was the real thing they decided was if I went off first, I would never shut up. As Lester and I really came to meet a long time ago now, it would seem, we were members of a panel that passed judgment on applications for research grants at the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. And they say Aboriginal names are always 6 inches long, etc. Well, they had to pick an institution that seemed to have an enormous name, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. So we shortened that. But we were both on a panel. He was the education representative, and I worked in the arts as an art person to advise whether applications for research about art history or particular art styles or moments in history should be funded. Now, you should keep a clock on me from after that, thanks. So I said I live an accidental life. The other day I gave a talk and I said I just lived an accidental life, and how it's interesting how some people really construct a career and think, well, I'll go there and I'll make my reputation there, and then I'll go up, and by this stage of my life I'll be a professor or whatever. And then I'll become Vice Chancellor, and then I'll become something else or whatever. But, you know, there's a basic thing in Aboriginal life, I irritate, therefore I exist, that you live by. And it seemed every position I went to, I irritated. And after a period of at least making one marked exhibition or project, I was sick of them and they were sick of me. So I moved on to other things. However, in the process, I fought to redefine Aboriginal art, because when I started in this career in the 70s or the 60s, Aboriginal art was this mysterious thing that no one could really define. They struggled to see it in any equity situation. They didn't see it as being equal to the great intellectual visual commentary that existed in Western art forms. Even though there was a revolution then in Western art forms, or each revolution in Western art forms still kept Aboriginal art out of those art forms. When people started to favour performance art, they still kept Aboriginal people out of it. They couldn't define it, they didn't see it, they didn't see anything Aboriginal people did. I'm saying Aboriginal in the broadest sense of the word. They did, or we did, as the equivalent value, and I don't mean in monetary terms, just in social terms, in critical thinking terms, and therefore in the academy or in the institutional academic terms. And so all my career, and of course all my life for that matter, has been a battle to define Aboriginal art, to fight for things to happen. So we now have Aboriginal people represented as curators in all the institutions, you'll see. But then it becomes another battle, because all those people that they employ, they are under training programs, or they are junior people. They're not people that are going to challenge the director of the South Australian Art Gallery to run the gallery. There's those positions that you won't be employed. As I got older, and this is most probably true of many other people, women and so on, as you get older, you become more and more, you become less and less visible, but you also become more powerful within yourself, in your identity, in what you know and what you can do, but you also become more of a threat to those institutions, that you will change them, really change them, rather than just be changing the label on the outdoor or putting an Aboriginal flag on the mast. You would actually challenge the way that institution will see itself. It will see Australian history and therefore think differently and allow the society, not the nation, the society, to think differently and see things more truthfully. And I think I should shut up now. Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
One question that I had for you is, why is Aboriginal art accepted as a part of the national narrative? It's the largest export art in Australia, it brings in millions of dollars to the local economy. And yet it's unacceptable to have recognised Aboriginal people in the birth certificate of the nation, which is the Constitution. Why is art acceptable to Australia? And yet our place in the birth certificate of the nation is not.
Well, that's simple. That's what I was trying to explain. I wrote a piece once called An Aboriginal Soliloquy, and I talked about talking to the deaf. So to communicate with the deaf, one must be visible, one must be clear, and we were talking about this before. All our lives, every day, it's like a Sisyphus. We get up and repeat the same story over and over again to every new white person we meet, to each new white institution, white in the broadest sense of that term, we meet. We repeat the same story and we repeat it and repeat it. It's like Sisyphus getting up and pushing the rock. So you must be visible. So first of all, you have to speak up. You can't just say, oh, I've got this public service job and I'll just shut up here and live out my life. You've got to be irritating. Well, one must be clear with what you want, though. One must be concise. Don't harangue on and on. Be concise about what you see as needing to be changed. And of course, you must be patient. That things may not happen overnight. But in reality, as I wrote, Aboriginal people, we feel that we're talking or we're acting out a soliloquy. You know, we're talking to the deaf. And James Baldwin, I'm sure it was, talked about constantly being told, well, it's not time yet, brother, it's not this time, just wait. Well, it's not time yet for this to happen. Well, what is that time? We should wait no longer. And as for the constitutional thing, I find it such a, Peter Dutton and company are really shooting their mouth off all the time to like idiots in a pub saying, well, let's take on China. Yeah, come on. Well, that communist state, repressive state, in 1948, when they wrote their constitution, they named 54 minority nations in their constitution. So that communist repressive state named 54 Aboriginal, First Peoples in their constitution. About that time, the other third of the world's population, India, in their constitution, they named something like 350 Adivasi names in their constitution. They're First Peoples. We can't even fucking name Aboriginal, let alone an Aboriginal name in our constitution. We've been going for what, 200, how many years? This is just brain dead stuff. And what are we afraid of? What is that going to say? That we're more civilised, more whatever than China? Or, the incredibly socialist India? These are really petty things. I think, and I quote this quite often, D.H. Lawrence, the famous author, not for his sex novels, but as a writer generally, he came out to Australia and wrote a novel. He tried to write a novel about Australia. And in the end, he basically said, there was this mutually exclusive term he couldn't deal with called Australian intelligentsia. And he named that novel Kangaroo. And that novel talks about this neo-fascist society of not Australian intelligentsia, and just said they were so brain dead, that's why he called them kangaroo. So these are no-brainers, as they say, or what's the best word? This is not something we should be talking about. These are things that just should happen. And as I said, you can talk to the deaf. I'm talking to the deaf. I'm talking to people not like yourselves, of course, But other people, we do this every day of our lives. Every day.
So to...
yeah, cut me short now.
No. I'm wanting to expand, but I think it took me... I think I read your work, and particularly just after I was reading the work of some of the early Indigenous scholars like Errol West and Mick Dodson and some of their earlier work. And I think it took me about 2 years to get hold and read your entire archive. And I think it was your earlier curatorship of an event at the National Gallery. And you were claiming, in which you do so eloquently, that inequality has a geography and it has an architecture. And this sort of picks up where Tyson's point as well, because his earlier work does this. And that inequality also has an antiquity and a ubiquity. It has a history, and it's ubiquitous in a sense that it tries to say that it doesn't have a history as you're reading it. And so if inequality has a geography and an architecture, it is both antiquity and ubiquitous. This leaves your work really tricky spaces to try and speak back to inequality. And Tyson, we've had long discussions about this, and you're over trying to explain inequality. You're wanting to move to the next level. So welcome to South Australia, and I hand it to you.
All right, I feel nervous now because, I don't know, I felt nervous from the moment when you said, like, we got past, present and future right here. And I'm thinking, which am I supposed to be, the future? If I'm your future, you're all stuffed. Like, we're done. Anyway, do you really want to do this? Okay, let's do this. 3 years ago, I crashed my car, and that left us in a bit of a pickle because I couldn't get to work and all that kind of thing. And we were living from week to week. We were like right on the edge of getting kicked out of our place, renting. And this publishing company called me up and offered me a $5,000 advance to write a book for them. So I banged a book out in 2 weeks, and I went, "You sure? You're going to give me $5,000 for a manuscript there?" And so, got a new car, which is good, and so we kept going. And then they published it. They changed the name because my name was a bit depressing. So they changed it to Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. And people thought, look, it's positive and it's Indigenous wisdom. And people bought it, and then they were kind of disappointed that when it's a bit dark. So I don't think the future's going to be that bad. I mean, that was after all the worst bits about my predictions about the future got sort of edited out because they were pretty damn grim. And sort of people, and that was the big... They didn't sell very many copies because, people thought it was a bit negative about the future and that, we got heaps of time yet, nothing bad's going to happen. And then, next minute... The world was on fire and everybody's buying this book, and now I'm doing lots of panels. So, that's my career. Well, apart from, there was about 20 years before that. I just completely wasted my time as I was younger then. And, I thought I was, picking up the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, but they didn't fit my hand too good, so I was repurposing the tools and, indigenous methodology, indigenous standpoint, I'm modifying the tools. We're going to take down the master's house and then I got the doctorate and then I've arrived. I'm going to dismantle this house. Got inside the house, the master's not there anymore. His nephew's there now, and he's running ayahuasca workshops and showing PowerPoints about climate change and I'm welcome to come in. Yeah, come in. Have some vodka, it's really cheap right now. Yeah, that's a Putin joke. People, that's how, oh God. We have these amazing predictive technologies, Hawke? Tell that story about the weather, predicting the weather. The best I did with Ukraine was, darling, clear some space in the shed. I'm going to be getting a few crates of vodka in a couple of weeks. It's going to be really cheap, and surely enough, $50 a litre, which was, that's about as far as I went with that. But I wasted most of my career, as most of us do, confusing correlation with causation, you know, and it's something we do a lot of, you know, particularly if we're not using empirical methods. You know, we're all studying in the humanities, we're in health and education and, you know, etc., the usual suspects. We're doing a lot of social sciences, and our work isn't really very empirical. And so we mixed up causation with correlation. So, you know, we happen to notice that alongside inequality tends to come a lot of racism. You know, racism tends to happen every time you look for equality, you're going to find racism there. So we start to go, well, that must like cause that. And so if we just address all the racism, if we address all the bigotry, if we address people's attitudes, then inequality will change. But, you know, the master's house doesn't need a new coat of paint. There's ants in the walls, there's ants in the foundations. You know, it's coming down. It's rotten to its core. Absolutely terrifying. So we keep, in my work, it's always just putting another layer of paint on the house and thinking, oh yeah, we're going to win hearts and minds. We're going to like teach everyone what terra nullius means. I mean, if you don't get it by now, you know, and I just kept finding, and they're burning out decade after decade, burning out, like teaching people over and over again, how many staff rooms, how many conferences, over and over, and then watching people go back to their factory settings after 2 weeks. You know, it just always rolls back because, you know, we were addressing the wrong things, and we have been for a long time. So I'm really hoping in this residency do something that makes me a bit nervous, which is to try and do some more Indigenous research. And I want to try and rope Lester in that's more structuralist than post-structuralist. Post-structuralism is about, you know, it's everything's in the text. If you can change the words, then you change the system. You know, structuralism was all about looking at the structures of inequality and changing those. You know, that's what critical race theory originally was about. It was about looking at the systems of inequality, looking at why the postcards are set up like this, and actually addressing the real things.
I really love that. I think it's in the 3rd chapter, getting close to the end of your book, close to the end of that chapter, where, you know, we're not the problem, the structure is, the systems are.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, constantly having to say that and then being asked to try and think it through is a real burden that's on us to try and change that system. It's
not just to be nice. It's not to be better people. It's not to find the sin in your heart and get it out of you. It's like, I'm just sick of guilt. I just can't work with settlers anymore. They're useless. Like, if I've got a team member who's a settler, they're like, they just waste all your time, and they can't think straight because they're spending the whole time trying to apologize to you just for existing, you know, and it's like, oh, can we just get on with the work, you know? So we look at things like, I don't know, and then at the same time, just this outrageous denial of the structural racism. Everyone wants to own this thing like it's something inside of them, like it's a sin to purge or something. And that if we can just change our attitudes, if we can just change our language and not say these words and say these words instead, if we can just, if we can become culturally aware, everything will be equal. And then it doesn't get equal. And nothing works if you don't factor in the structural racism. So the Santa Fe Institute recently took on, this is the Institute for Complexity Science in the United States, they recently took on the problem of the predictive modelling for COVID spread was not working, and they couldn't figure out why. They put in all the right values, all the right algorithms, and it should have shown how the spread would happen. You know, it's like we've got all these people in America, and we've set up all these little software agents in here to behave just like people, all these people equally moving around in a continent, and that should have shown us how it spreads. But then a couple of ladies recently went, well, you're not factoring in racism. And they're like, I'm sorry, and it's a different discipline. This is public health we're doing here. Keep your, leftist stuff over there. And it's like, well, no, it's important because, you've got people zoned into different kinds of communities, like postcodes and the way these are policed, the way the different flows of people are policed and regulated and limited depending on, what your ethnicity is, what your class is, everything else. We need to factor in gender. We need to factor in all this inequality. And they did just factoring in racism. All of a sudden, the next time they ran the program, it worked like a charm. They predicted exactly and perfectly how the spread would work. That's how it's real. That's how you know it's real. That's how you know if you don't count it, if you don't factor that in, then nothing's going to work. None of your models will work. We have to be changing things, thinking about things, working with things based on the reality. And the reality is structural racism exists. It's not seeping out of your hearts. It's not some collective crappy bigotry that if we could just change everybody's mind, if we could just make them aware, then everything will be fine. You're in a system, a growth-based economic system that can't grow unless demand exceeds supply. That means there needs to be more people needing shit than there is shit to go around. And you can't have economic growth without that. You can't price anything in this economic system unless it's limitable and excludable. So you have to have a limited amount of that supply, and you have to have increasing populations of people who you can exclude from access to that. Real estate, as you'd all know, anybody who's like younger than a boomer level, like boomers cashed out on that, well done, you're doing really well. But the real estate market's a really, really good example of that. This is a system that is inherently inequitable, that demands inequality just to function. Our education system must do that. We have a testing system from the United States, which is designed to give us metrics to be able to plan ahead and see how many prison beds need to be manufactured, how many new wings on the prison need to be made. They look at the high school test scores to do the predictive modelling for that. And they do that every year, And it can even go back the other way. If they want to grow the prison bigger because it's big business now, then they can get people to change the tests. We have a sorting hat in our schools. We create a caste system. We decide who's going to be at the bottom, who's going to be at the top. We take the best and brightest from our Aboriginal communities, from our migrant communities, any communities that we need to make sure do not get their act together, and we make sure we extract the potential leaders from those communities while they're still young. And we assimilate them and we promote them through the academy, we promote them through politics, we promote them through business and enterprise, we promote them now through tech, that's the latest thing, and we get them out of there. Anyway, I could go on, but that's the future for you.
I'm smiling under the mask. It's a nice segue to change it up towards the future and what you're wanting to achieve in the time that you're with us to try and go to the future. But I just want to sort of make this point about your provocation and the structural issue is that when feminism, when it was left to women in the structures to try and change the structures, and that men didn't think it was their role to do it, it left, I think, the movement to change the system. Women were never the problem. When it was left to women only to change the entire system, to feminise the system, I think we were left poorer for it. And I think that, again, coming back to your book, when people who are burdened to change the system who least benefit from it. I'm not sure whether that's liberation, and that's what I think that you're coming at. Now, let's just shift it up to the future and what your time with us, what you think you'll do. And I think I just want to quickly just talk to my stuff, and that is that I spend a lot of time articulating how inequality works in different decades, almost yearly. And I guess female scholars and scholars of difference, scholars of colour, constantly have to rehearse how inequality works. You just heard two amazing scholars talk about inequality. But what's the future look like? And so I think more and more now I'm shifting towards, whilst I'm very eloquent and would use with precision about how inequality works, I'm more interested in diagnosing the problems of our time and what this means for Aboriginal people, and particularly Aboriginal children. And I think the conclusions that I'm at the moment with my writing and my scholarship, I'm at the closing end of my career. And so I'm just getting my archive in place, and I've concluded that when I ask the question of myself, you've only got a next decade, what are the great challenges of our time and how will these affect Aboriginal children? And biodiversity, climate change, digital revolution, superdiversity, drought, heat, sun, freshwater fall, sea level rise, the fall of democracy, the lack of oil, how we feed the world with nutritious food, to live in a world free of disease and not train one child in the world to exploit the planet. The diagnosis of our time has to turn to the future, and so this is the project that I'm on, is to try for my community to explain to them this is what's going to happen and this is what we expect from Australia to help us. So I think the audience are really keen to hear about what you see as the future and what are some of the things that you're going to try and achieve whilst you're here. Djon?
Well, I have the answer to the world's... I have that number. It's 8. I saw that film. There's a TV show or film, Don't Look Up, about the comet coming towards Earth and how these people try to go on, and scientists try to go out and tell everyone. I don't know if you've seen it at all. And they go on a morning program and everyone's talking about, Beyonce's got divorced, blah, blah. And they're saying, what are you two people talking about? Oh, we're talking about this comet that's just about hit the Earth and wipe everyone out. And they say, it's incredible. But what do you think about Beyonce? How much do you feel? And it's like that. It's just people either love it or hate the show. The irony has never been something in the United States society. I don't think they've never really taken to irony or to that kind of thing. But I do think about lots of things in the world about poverty and injustice and so on. So in my life and career, most probably everything you do, it's to see not see everything as a failure. That whatever you do, you may fail, but you are a better person for it. Everything like your book, etc. The fact you've put out a book, you've completed that research as an Aboriginal author. The times we spent giving out sixpence, as it turned out, to different people, to Aboriginal people to complete research on subjects that were special to us. Originally, the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies did not have an Aboriginal person on its board, curiously enough. did not have an Aboriginal researcher in that place. I don't think they had many Aboriginal staff, or stenographer or whatever, or cleaner or whatever. It was weird, and I was, my first years were spent there in that arm wrestle because the government came, again, the Australian intelligentsia, they just suddenly realised, well, hang on, we're giving all this money to the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, but it's not going to any Aboriginal people. And there are no Aboriginal people on the board of that place. Yet we supposedly believe in self-determination. So they then struggled. The debate was a curious thing. You should make a film about it, actually, the debate about if we let Aboriginal people in to run this place, could they run it? Would it degrade, it's racist in the sense that would it bring the IQ of this place down by having Aboriginal people on the board, by having Aboriginal scholars? Would that reduce the IQ of the place? It was literally like that. It was hard to be there. It was hard to be one of the two Aboriginal people in that place. Now, this is before Rigney showed up too. It was just quite a long time, it seemed, for a very long time before the glacier then collapsed. I gave a talk to some architecture students just recently, like about 5 minutes before this thing started. And so my mixed metaphors will come out of that. I talked about how things change. So the glacier moves 3 centimetres a year or something. So although we wait and we are patient, it moves like that. And then suddenly a whole piece of glacier breaks off and shatters. We're now at this time architecturally, in one level, there are a whole set of Aboriginal cultural centres that are going to be built around the country. And so I came to think that what I'm going to do is to talk to lots of people here about the Aboriginal Cultural Centre that's going to be built down the road from here, or is starting to be built, and how it came to be, and what is the real mission statement of both the Aboriginal people who want this to run, and what do they want, or what do they think they want, and what do the politicians, of course, giving the money, what do they think they want, etc. So, and broaden it to say, well, what is this big shattering thing that happened, which is providing all these opportunities for architects now to design these buildings, etc. So we're now at this place. Every so often that happens in your life. I'm getting back to the future. So things do happen. Some years ago, in my lifetime, I would never have dreamed we would have a welcome to country or acknowledgement to country. I would not believe we'd have Aboriginal elders sitting here and being honoured. I just thought that is a big statement. And that encourages all Aboriginal people internally. We feel we are people. We feel we are somebody. When I was working in Long Bay Jail last year, I began all my classes. I had everyone repeat after me. We all did the I am somebody. I may be black, but I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be in jail, but I am somebody. I have these rights. And those things of teaching us, and we teach ourselves. I was teaching myself, of course, and invigorating myself, but to invigorate the next generation that we are not useless, There's a band called the Kulamanandi band, Warlpiri band, and one of their songs was "We Are Not Useless," which I used to quote in my academic papers, that we are somebody. So I think positively. Generally now, every year I'm asked by some institution, I'm proud to say I've never been institutionalised. By that, it doesn't mean I haven't been locked up by the police. It means I'm not in an institution. I'm not bound by an institution's rules. I don't have to cut my hair. I don't have to do those things, or wear a suit and a tie, or whatever else, other mental practices, constraints that you operate under. So not that all of you, I'm sure you're all working like Winston Smith. You're secretly writing things. So within the institution. So to get to the point, so every year an institution asks me would you create an exhibition for us? So I then do you have an idea for an exhibition? That exhibition is normally located in that place. I've travelled and did many exhibitions in exotic places and international places. 20 years ago, I was part of a large Aboriginal art exhibition that took part in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. That exhibition, it was all Aboriginal artists. That exhibition will most probably be the only exhibition of Australian art that place will ever have. The Hermitage Museum would have a good chance of being the largest and most important art museum in history. The material that is there, Australian institutions are just waking up to the collections and trying to get hold of those collections to be shown here. It is an amazing thing. I've taken exhibitions to Cuba, before it became, when it was unpleasant to be in Cuba, etc. But getting to my point, it is, at the end of the day, I decided that if I was going to keep going out and telling these stories, as we tell stories every day, I would do them in the regions. Adelaide's not one of those places, but places like Dubbo, Renmark, whatever, Bendigo, those places, those little country towns, which are quite often the seats of very embedded racism, where people definitely are put upon. The Aboriginal populations are demeaned and insulted in every turn that you can think of. Just going there and booking into a hotel to be there to do the exhibition, and I'll go down to the bar and think I'll just go down and have a beer before I go and meet the curators, and you suddenly realise everyone's looking at you in the bar, and that's because we've got a nigger in the woodpile here. No Aboriginal person's really allowed to be in that bar, or they're certainly shunned. We don't allow your kind of people around here. Those kinds of things that you find. So I did an exhibition called The Dingo Project. And so a local artist wrote this poem, which I was determined to read, which was a piece of text. It was a painting, but it was a piece of text. And he said, I am not to blame. I have a name. I had a family. I had a role. I was one of the mob. I am Warrigal. I am Yugai. I am Dingo. I am not to blame. You killed my family, you stole my food, you hunted me. I am not to blame. Poisoned my water, watched me die, caused me pain. I am not to blame. 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 And those, just by that artist, a local artist, totally unknown to the art world, he was able to say that to, I live in one of the wealthiest places in the country, and he was able to put that as an Aboriginal person, he was able to get up and say that to the richest people in Australia. So,
thank you. Mm. Tyson,
that's just a weight off. Let's get to know the future's taken care of. Yeah.
Go on, sorry. What?
The future's taken care of. It is good.
No, it isn't. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm either going to make some replicas of the deck chairs from the Titanic and just paint some dots on them, or I'm going to do some, I want to do some, I don't know, I've been working for 3 decades to get in a room with Rigney, so I'm going to try and do some stuff with him. I want to do some education future stuff that's looking at the structures of education, not just the curriculum and what we can include for a little bit more culture war bait to fight our battles over endlessly and endlessly with these pricks. I don't want to do that anymore. Yeah, I want to do something structural for the world that actually is and the world that's emerging. And I want to do that for my daughter. It's too late for her, but for her kids, maybe. You know, she went through a curriculum that was designed to prepare students for the workforce. And that is the primary stated objective of our education system, and it needs to be more than that, different from that. She was prepared for a workforce that no longer existed. She went through being told, follow your dream, you can be anything, you could be Prime Minister, and she was prepared for that until like everything, she graduated sort of the year everything started falling apart. In the job market and everything else, and GFC going on and everything. There was nothing in Cairns, you know. And the principal was like, the graduation speech was, cheer up, it's not that bad. There are still some very exciting opportunities for some of you in the service industries. You can try and go to TAFE, get a Cert 3 in catering, get a massage certificate, you know. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say that my daughter is one of the few girls in her graduating class who isn't now selling her body on the internet for money. I'm very proud of her. She's stacking shelves in the chemist warehouse, which she worked very hard to get that job, and I'm very glad she's going to get it, although that will be automated soon. Like most things will be automated. And I think we really need to start thinking about what education is going to look like and what it's going to be for. Because at the moment it's still preparing people for a world that no longer exists. It's gone. And even if we tried to catch up with where we are right now, that'll be too late too, because it's changing real fast. There aren't very many jobs that AIs can't do at the moment. The one thing that they can't do and will never be able to do is evaluate the human experience. And I think that's where most jobs are going to lie, is in evaluation. So the educated classes will be evaluating things like art, and there will be peer reviewing research and stuff like this. All right? And everyone else is going to be evaluating donuts, TV shows, you know, stuff like this. People will be working for a universal basic income because most people won't have jobs, not like in the form that they are now. But you'll still have to do like work for the dole. Hey, heads up, everything that they've done to us in the last century, we were just the trial. That was the prototype. It's going to happen to all of you, so sucked in. You should have been there. Yeah, sucked in. And maybe just come and sit with us and try and find out how to cope with that, because it's going to be pretty full on, and it's we've got some skills. We won't be giving you mindfulness training and breathing techniques to get you through it. We got some better stuff. We've got some good stuff for you.
Can I just comment on that? The thing where you come from, Cape York, etc., all those communities, the constant statement is, these guys, these families, these men and women have got to get jobs. How do we give them a job? how do all these Aboriginal people going to do anything? How are they going to survive? And why don't they contribute better to the population? The thing is, of course, that no one will have a job shortly. I trained to be an accountant, as I might have said to you in another talk. I trained to be an accountant at university. This jacket is the only thing left of that. Accountancy, it's all done by a computer now. It's by algorithms, etc. These things are done, all these things are going to be done by artificial intelligence and robotics of various sorts. So no wider population people are going to have jobs either. But what Aboriginal people and societies do know is how to socialise meaningfully, how to socialise meaningfully in resolving conflicts, how to socialise meaningfully to make your life meaningful. So you're not thinking I'm depressed about I haven't got the latest Gucci shoes or something else. You don't even think about it. It's just something that we know how to socialise, talk to the environment, talk to the planet, and in return we operate so that we don't destroy the planet, we don't destroy the environment. So that's the thing that Aboriginal people do. We make, when I say meaningfully, we socialise meaningfully, so we feel we are important. We have a good construct of ourselves, and we enjoy life, whatever is thrown at you. And that's, nobody's going to have a job.
Well,
they're struggling to have a job now.
That's what we have to contribute to the rest of the curriculum, because it's not going to take much to prepare people for the workforce of, evaluation and stuff like that. I think people are going to have a lot of spare time, a lot of free time. The sort of jury's out after COVID. Nobody wants to go back to full-time work in most of the developed world. I think, people will earn their basic UBI tokens. Will probably be NFTs. That'll be like coupons, deals that you get, buy one, get one free or something. I don't know. It'll be stuff like that. But you'll have a fair bit of spare time, and some people are probably just going to go into a virtual reality simulation and have their toes licked by a deep fake of their favourite celebrity, but then everyone else will have a lot of time to get out and start to rebuild some kind of community and start to organise and figure out how we're going to do this 1,000-year clean-up, because it is going to take 1,000 years and someone's got to clean it up. So that's the exciting part, and that's what the education needs to be about. So I want to work on that with you, Brad.
I think in summary, thank you for coming today, and the future in terms of trying to summarise the eloquence of you two on stage and sort of picking up on what Uncle Lewis was talking. If the future is to stand for we the people, I think the future has to sort of understand and share how the nation makes its political choices. I think your work speaks to why is the nation making these political choices and what are our values. And I think that gets us to the future. And I think so grateful for your work in taking me through understanding how the nation state, like settler Australia, makes its political choices, particularly on children in my instance, of why it chooses to detain children in the Pacific, and that every child in prison in the Northern Territory is Aboriginal. Why does it make that political choice? And what are our values? And I just wanted to thank you for your eloquence on that. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real pleasure And I just wanted to thank again, please, if the political choice is made by an institution, on the other side you'll see the banner of Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous Irene Watson on her leadership through the Indigenous strategy, the Action for Research, and our RAP, our Internal Reconciliation Action Plan, which is saying what this organisation is about. Our DVCR is taking time out of her busy schedule to be with us tonight. Jacinta Thompson and her team, which are from the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre, that do a wonderful job on the legacy in trying to promote equity. And her whole team has been amazing. Uncle Lewis is always here at this university, always giving his time, and so are the other elders that are amongst us. So without further ado, could you please thank those people? With no further ado, I'd like to bring the proceedings to a close, knowing that our two speakers will be around to take your questions, but please keep your social distance. We also would like to thank all of you for coming again, and our speaker circuit. If you do want to find more on the Bob Hawke Prime Ministerial Centre's public exhibitions and speech nights, please go online. It's a terrific website, easily to navigate. If you're wanting to look at our RAP, our Reconciliation Action Plan by our Pro-Vice-Chancellor Indigenous, and our Indigenous research strategy is terrific, led by our DVCR, Professor Hughes Warrington. And thanks very much.